I have always believed that the truth has a way of finding its own light. You can bury it under years of resentment, pile accusations on top of it like furniture stacked against a door, but eventually something shifts, and everything comes tumbling out into the open. I learned that lesson at my own family's dinner table, on a humid Saturday evening in Miami when the jasmine was blooming in the backyard and the ceiling fans were spinning slow circles overhead, and my soon-to-be sister-in-law decided that my engagement party was the perfect moment to destroy my life. My name is Valentina Cruz, and I have lived in Miami my entire 31 years. I grew up in Hialeah, moved to Brickell in my mid-20s when my career started gaining traction, and for the past 3 years I had been in what I believed was a serious, committed relationship with a man named Daniel Ortega, who was thoughtful and warm, and the kind of person who remembered what you said you wanted 6 months ago, and surprised you with it on an ordinary Tuesday. Daniel proposed to me on the rooftop of our favorite restaurant in Coconut Grove, with the bay glittering behind him and a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, and when I said yes, I meant it with everything I had. I want you to understand that before I tell you the rest of this story. I want you to understand exactly what was at stake, and exactly how much I had already lost before that dinner even began. Daniel's family is large and loud and beautiful in the way that Miami families often are, with roots spread across 3 countries and enough cousins to fill a stadium. His mother, Carmen, is a formidable woman who makes ropa vijja from scratch and has opinions about everything, but she had welcomed me warmly from the beginning, and I had worked hard to deserve that warmth. His father, Roberto, is quieter, the kind of man who shows love through fixing things, who had spent an entire weekend resealing the windows in my Brickell apartment without being asked. And then there was Sandra. Sandra is Daniel's younger sister by 4 years. She is 27 years old, and she is stunning in a way that she is always known about, and occasionally weaponized. She has the kind of face that makes people stop mid-sentence, dark eyes and cheekbones that belong on a magazine cover, and she carries herself with the particular confidence of someone who has rarely been told no. I want to be fair to her here because fairness matters to me even when it is not reciprocated. Sandra and I had never been close. We were cordial. We exchanged birthday texts. We sat next to each other at Christmas dinner and talked about things that did not matter. But there had always been something underneath the surface of her politeness, something that felt like calculation, and I had never been able to pin down exactly what it was or where it came from. What I know now, though I did not know it then, is that Sandra had been spending money she did not have. Not small amounts. Not a few $100s here and there. We're talking about a pattern that had been building for over 2 years, borrowing from her parents under different pretenses, telling her mother she needed help with her car, telling her father it was a security deposit on a new apartment, constructing a web of small lies that had accumulated into something enormous. Carmen and Roberto had given her somewhere in the neighborhood of $40,000 over those 2 years, dipping into their retirement savings, telling themselves it was temporary, that Sandra would pay it back when she got back on her feet. They had not told Daniel. They had not told anyone. It was the kind of secret that families keep not out of malice but out of love, the irrational and stubborn love that makes parents protect their children from consequences long past the point when the consequences would have actually helped. I did not know any of this. I had no idea that this money had moved. I had no idea that Carmen and Roberto were quietly struggling, that the retirement trip to Spain they had been planning for years had been quietly postponed, that Roberto had been working extra shifts at his brother's contracting company on weekends to try to rebuild what had been given away. I found all of this out later. At the time, sitting in my future in-law's home in Coral Gables on a warm October evening, surrounded by the people I thought I knew best in the world, I believed the biggest drama of the night would be whether Carmen's cousin Rosa drank too much wine before the toast. The house in Coral Gables is one of those old Florida homes that feels like it has absorbed decades of memory into its walls. There is a wide front porch with terracotta tile and a backyard that Roberto has turned into something close to a paradise, with a mango tree in the corner and string lights threading through the branches of a massive live oak. Carmen had set up tables out there for the party, white linen over folding tables, candles in glass jars, platters of food that had been cooking since the previous afternoon. It smelled like sofrito and sea air and the particular sweetness of Miami evenings in October, when the worst of the summer heat has finally released its grip and you can breathe again. There were about 30 people there that night. Extended family, a handful of our close friends, Daniel's colleagues from the architecture firm where he worked. My best friend Marisol was there, standing near the drink table in a yellow dress, already keeping a careful eye on the room the way she always does when she senses that something is off. Marisol has known me for 15 years, and she can read the air of a room the way some people read weather. She had texted me that afternoon, just a simple message that said, "Keep your head clear tonight," which I had dismissed as general pre-party nerves on her behalf. I should have paid closer attention to that text. Daniel was at my side for most of the early part of the evening, his hand at the small of my back, easy and comfortable, and I remember thinking how lucky I was, how all the work and patience of building a life with someone had led to exactly this moment. I was wearing a cream-colored dress that I had bought specifically for the occasion, my dark hair loose around my shoulders, and I felt, in that particular way you only feel a handful of times in your life, completely at peace with where I was standing. Sandra arrived about 40 minutes into the gathering. She came through the back gate with a bottle of wine, and a smile that I now understand was rehearsed, the kind of smile that is doing a great deal of work to conceal something urgent underneath it. She hugged her mother, kissed her father on the cheek, embraced Daniel warmly, and then turned to me with that smile fully in place and said how beautiful everything looked and how happy she was for us. I thanked her genuinely. What I did not notice, because I was busy greeting guests and making sure Carmen did not need help in the kitchen, was that Sandra had positioned herself strategically near the drink table with Carmen's sister, Margaret, who is 70 years old and has the hearing of a woman half her age and the memory of an elephant. I did not notice that Sandra was speaking to Margaret with an intensity that did not match the casual setting. I did not notice that Margaret's expression shifted from warmth to concern to something that looked almost like alarm. I was busy being happy. I was busy being a woman who believed her life was exactly what it appeared to be. The first crack appeared about an hour into the evening. Carmen had just finished bringing out the last of the food, and Roberto had tapped his glass to signal that he wanted to say a few words. The backyard went quiet, 30 people turning toward the head of the table with drinks in hand, and the string lights glowing warm above us. Roberto is not a man of many words, but the words he does offer tend to land with weight, and I was already feeling the particular sting behind my eyes that means I am about to cry happy tears when Sandra spoke. She did not shout. That is the thing I keep coming back to, even now. She did not make a scene in the theatrical way I might have expected from someone choosing to do what she did. She simply said, in a voice that was steady and clear and loud enough for the nearest dozen people to hear, that she thought before the toasts began, there was something the family deserved to know. That she had been doing some thinking. That she cared about her parents too much to stay quiet. Roberto lowered his glass. Carmen turned from the kitchen doorway. Daniel looked at his sister with an expression I could not immediately read, something between confusion and warning. And Sandra looked directly at me. She said that over the past 2 years, money had gone missing from her parents' accounts.
Significant amounts.
She said she had noticed discrepancies, that she had gone through old bank statements she found in her parents' filing cabinet, and that based on what she could see, the withdrawals coincided with times when I had been particularly present in the family's life. She did not say I had stolen it outright. She was too careful for that. She framed it as concern. She framed it as love for her parents. She used words like worried and confused, and I just think someone should ask the questions, and every single one of those carefully chosen words landed in that backyard like stones dropped into still water. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard. I stood completely still. I am a person who, when genuinely blindsided, goes very quiet rather than very loud, and this was genuine blindsiding of the highest order. I felt Daniel's hand leave the small of my back. I felt Marisol's eyes find me from across the yard. I felt 30 people recalibrate their understanding of the evening in real time, the shift in the air as palpable as a change in barometric pressure. And then Carmen spoke. I had expected Carmen to be shaken. I had expected her to look at me with questions in her eyes, to enter that horrible middle space of not knowing who to believe. What I had not expected was for Carmen to go completely still in a different way than I had, the stillness of someone who is working very hard to control something powerful. She looked at her daughter for a long moment, and then she said, very quietly, that she did not know what Sandra was referring to. Sandra pushed. She said she had seen the statements. She said she knew money had moved. She named specific months. She described amounts with a confidence that clearly surprised even some of the people who might have otherwise been inclined to give her the benefit of the doubt. And Carmen said, even more quietly, that Sandra needed to stop talking. The yard went even more still, if that was possible. Roberto had set down his glass entirely. He was looking at Sandra with an expression I had never seen on his face before, and I have spent 3 years watching that man's face across dinner tables and through holidays and on a random Sunday morning when he stopped by to drop off mangoes from his tree. The expression he wore in that moment was grief. Not anger. Grief. Carmen looked at her husband. Some private communication passed between them that the rest of us were not meant to see. And then Carmen looked at Sandra and said that the money Sandra was referring to had not been taken by anyone. That Carmen and Roberto had given it freely. That they had given it to Sandra herself over the course of the past 2 years, and that they had never once asked for a single justification in return because she was their daughter, and that was what parents did, and that Sandra standing in their backyard accusing an innocent woman of theft was the single most shameful thing she had ever witnessed in her life. I will never forget the way Sandra's face changed. It did not collapse all at once. It went in stages, the way a building comes down in a controlled demolition, a slow and sequential surrendering of structure. The confidence left first, and then the careful composure, and then something underneath both of those things, something raw and frightened and very young, surfaced in its place. She opened her mouth and closed it. She looked at her father, and whatever she saw there did not help her. Roberto had turned slightly away, in the manner of someone who cannot bear to look directly at a thing. Margaret, bless her ancient and unfiltered heart, said loudly from the drink table that she had wondered when this was going to come out. Several things happened at once in the aftermath of Carmen's revelation, in the way that things do when a social event absorbs a shock and tries to reorganize itself around it. People began talking in low voices. Someone refilled their drink. Marisol materialized at my elbow with the quiet efficiency of a very good friend and said nothing, just stood there, which was exactly right. Daniel excused himself from the group and walked toward the far end of the backyard where the mango tree stands, and I watched his shoulders and tried to understand what was moving through him. Sandra had gone very quiet. She was standing near the table where she had been sitting, and she was looking at her phone, and I remember thinking that seemed like an odd thing to be doing in the middle of the implosion she had just caused. I did not understand the significance of what she was doing with that phone until approximately 20 minutes later. Because here is the thing about the truth that I mentioned at the beginning. It does not just find one piece of light and stop there. When it starts moving, it tends to keep moving, and it does not ask permission, and it does not check with you first about whether you are ready. The gate at the side of the house opened at approximately 8:45 in the evening. I know the time because I had just checked my phone, trying to ground myself in something concrete while the party reformed itself into an awkward approximation of what it had been before Sandra's announcement. I heard the gate, and I assumed it was a late guest, someone who had gotten lost navigating the Coral Gables streets, and I turned in that direction with the automatic social reflex of a woman hosting a party. The man who walked through that gate was tall, with close-cropped hair and the easy physical confidence of someone comfortable in his body. He was wearing a linen shirt the color of sand and carrying a bottle of wine, and he looked around the backyard with a slightly uncertain expression, the expression of someone who has been invited somewhere but is not entirely sure of his welcome. His eyes moved through the crowd and then found Sandra, and when they found Sandra, something happened in his face that was entirely legible. His name, I would learn, was Aaron Perez. And he had been sleeping with my fiancé. Not with me. With Daniel. I want to stop here for a moment because I think this part of the story deserves the space that it requires. I am going to tell you what happened next, but I need you to understand the particular quality of the shock involved, which is different from the shock of a simple betrayal. It was not just that Daniel had been unfaithful. It was not just that I had been lied to, for what I would later learn were nearly 14 months. It was the specific nature of the reorientation that was required, the sense of looking back at a relationship and understanding that you had been holding a picture that was only ever showing you part of what was actually in the frame. Aaron did not know that this was an engagement party. He had been told by Sandra, apparently, that it was a casual family dinner, that Daniel had mentioned he wanted to catch up, that he should come by around 8:30. Sandra had texted him. That was what she had been doing on her phone while her family reorganized itself around her humiliation. She had sent Aaron Perez a message telling him to come to her parents' house, knowing exactly what his arrival would mean, and she had done it as the second chapter of an evening she had designed to be catastrophic for someone. She had simply miscalculated which catastrophe would land first. I did not understand any of this in the moment that Aaron walked through the gate. What I understood was that Sandra's face, which had been tight and ashamed for the past 20 minutes, suddenly came alive with something that was not quite satisfaction, but was close to it. And I understood that Daniel, who had been standing by the mango tree with his back partially to the party, had gone absolutely rigid. Marisol understood before I did. She took hold of my forearm very gently and said my name once, quietly, in the tone she uses when she needs me to pay close attention. Aaron looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Aaron. And in the space between those two looks was an entire story that had nothing to do with me. Carmen saw it. Roberto, even with his eyes partially averted from the general disaster of the evening, saw it. Margaret at the drink table definitely saw it because Margaret sees everything and always has. And I saw it, standing in the backyard of the house that would have become my family's house, in my cream-colored dress, with the string lights overhead and the mango tree in the corner and the jasmine still blooming along the back fence because nature has no regard whatsoever for the timing of human catastrophe. Daniel turned to me. His face was the most honest I had ever seen it, which is a brutal thing to realize about someone you love, that the most truthful version of their face is the one that appears in the moment when there is nothing left to hide behind. He did not say anything immediately. I think he was searching for a beginning, and I think he could not find one, because there is no good beginning for that particular conversation. I took off the ring. I want to be clear that I did not do it dramatically. I did not throw it. I did not make a speech. I pulled it gently from my finger, the ring that had belonged to his grandmother, the ring he had placed there on a rooftop in Coconut Grove with the bay glittering behind him, and I held it out to him, and he took it, and I held his gaze for a moment that felt very long and was probably very short, and then I looked at Marisol and said I was ready to go. What happened after I left is something I pieced together over the following days from Marisol, who stayed for another hour, and from Carmen, who called me the following morning. Sandra, apparently, did not experience the triumphant unraveling she had been engineering. Aaron's arrival had been her attempt to expose Daniel in front of the family, to create a scene that would humiliate him and by extension humiliate me, which she seemed to believe would somehow rehabilitate her own position in the aftermath of being exposed as the person who had quietly drained her parents' savings. She had miscalculated the emotional mathematics of the room entirely. What she had not accounted for was that her parents were already devastated by their own humiliation, and that adding another layer of family scandal on top of it did not elevate her in their eyes. It buried her further. Roberto left the party, and went inside, and did not come back out. Carmen stayed, because Carmen is the kind of woman who stays, but she did not speak to Sandra for the remainder of the evening. Aaron, to his credit or perhaps simply to his discomfort, left within 10 minutes of arriving, once the nature of the situation became clear to him. I do not know what he had been told about his relationship with Daniel, whether he had known about me, whether he had been deceived as thoroughly as I had. That is a question I eventually stopped needing the answer to, because the answer would not have changed anything that mattered. Daniel called me 12 times that night. I did not answer. He texted a message that was long and full of apology and explanation, and I read it once, and then set my phone face down on my kitchen counter and poured myself a glass of the good rum I keep for difficult occasions. In the weeks that followed, I learned the full shape of the story. Carmen told me about the money, all of it, because she felt I deserved to know the truth about what Sandra had been trying to do. She told me it with a kind of weary honesty that made me love her more than I ever had during the years when I was trying to become her daughter-in-law. She said she was sorry, not for Daniel, not for Sandra, but for me, for being brought into the orbit of her family's failures when I had done nothing to deserve any of it. I told her she had nothing to apologize for. I meant that. Sandra, I heard through Marisol, who heard through Margaret, who hears everything, entered a period of serious reckoning with her parents about the money. There were conversations. There were agreements made about repayment and accountability. I do not know the details because they are not mine to know, and I have made peace with that boundary. What I do know is that the version of events she had tried to construct, the version where she was the protective daughter uncovering financial wrongdoing by an outsider, did not survive contact with the truth for more than about 12 minutes. Daniel moved out of the apartment we had been planning to share by the end of November. I will not tell you that I did not grieve that. I will not perform a toughness I did not always feel. There were mornings in that first month when the Miami light came through my brickell windows in the particular gold of early November, and I missed him with a physical weight, missed the idea of him, the version I had believed in. Grief is not always rational, and it does not care whether the person you are grieving deserves the grief. But here is what I also know. I know that I stood in that backyard in Coral Gables, and I did not shout, and I did not perform my pain for an audience, and I did not allow anyone to see me broken in a moment that had been specifically designed to break me. I took off a ring that was not mine to keep, and I walked out of a gate, and I got into Marisol's car, and I let her drive me home along the Brickell waterfront with the windows down and the warm October air moving through my hair, and I was sad, but I was also, underneath the sadness, something I did not expect to feel so quickly. I was free. I have thought a great deal about Sandra since then, about what she was actually trying to accomplish that night. I think she genuinely believed that if she could redirect the family's attention toward an external threat, toward me, she could escape the consequences of what she had done to her parents. I think she had convinced herself so thoroughly of the strategy that she had stopped examining whether it made any sense. She had spent 2 years building a lie that protected her, and when that lie was in danger of collapsing, she reached for the most available tool, which was me, and she swung it as hard as she could. The problem was that she had not verified the ground she was standing on before she swung, and when it gave way beneath her, there was nothing to catch her fall. The irony, of course, is that without Sandra's intervention, the dinner might have ended without any of the other pieces moving. Aaron had apparently been under the impression, Daniel later admitted in a letter I received and read only once, that Daniel was planning to end things with me soon anyway. Whether that is true, or simply the kind of thing people tell themselves and their other parties to make the geometry of a betrayal more bearable, I cannot say. What I know is that Sandra's plan to expose me accidentally exposed everything else, pulled loose a thread she had not meant to pull, and unraveled a garment she had not known she was wearing. There is a particular kind of person who goes through life believing that they are the author of other people's stories. Sandra is that kind of person. She spent months constructing a narrative where I was the villain and she was the truth teller, and she walked into that backyard on an October evening in Coral Gables fully confident that she knew how the story ended. She had the setting right. She had the timing right. She had even, in a darkly impressive way, arranged for a second act. She had just forgotten to account for the fact that the truth does not take direction. I am still in Miami. I still live in Brickell, still watch the bay turn colors in the evening from my balcony, still get coffee from the same place on weekday mornings where the guy behind the counter knows my order and has known it for 4 years. My life, from the outside, looks almost exactly as it did before that October evening. Inside it is different, but different in the way that you are different after something clarifies rather than something simply breaks. Carmen still calls me. That surprised me, and then it did not. She is a woman who understands that relationships do not always follow the lines that biology or law draws around them, and she had decided somewhere in the wreckage of that evening that I was someone she wanted in her life, regardless of the paperwork. We have lunch sometimes in Coconut Grove, at a place near the water that does the best ceviche I have ever eaten. We talk about her garden and my work and the particular aggravations of living in Miami in the summer. We do not talk about Daniel or Sandra, and we do not need to. Marisol says I am the calmest person she has ever watched go through something genuinely terrible, and I told her that calm is not always the same thing as fine, and she said she knew that, and we left it there. I think about the ring sometimes. The one that had belonged to Daniel's grandmother, that I pulled from my finger and placed in his hand on a warm night with string lights overhead. I hope it finds someone who deserves it. I hope whoever wears it next does not have to give it back. I hope she stands in some backyard somewhere or on some rooftop somewhere and feels exactly what I felt in the moment before everything changed, which was that feeling of being completely, perfectly, foolishly at peace. And I hope nobody has to learn the way I did that peace built on a foundation that was never real is not peace at all. It is just the quiet before someone opens a gate.